The failure of people who put significant bids in, $3 or whatever, to even get a turn. Everybody pretty much put a buck in except for the Chinese again. The Chinese aren't really interested in doing much of anything. Now, you may have, I may have led you astray by some of my reasoning saying, hey, the Germans can't up their production. Actually, they can right from the beginning. The two fascist powers, well, three fascist powers, are able to crank their production as quickly as they like, as long as they remain fascist, which I haven't really decided if I'm going to allow people to wander out of those. I feel like that option is dangerous, not just in terms of what the game, game balance or something like that, because you could end up having, Germany wander its way over into the capitalist or socialist side and then become natural allies with the other nations of their same of the new ideology. That can really, really change the nature of World War II. But more than that, from sort of a historical basis, it doesn't make a lot of sense. In these 10 years, you're not going to see easily the US, Britain, France enter into a totally different government form without something more severe than is kind of indicated. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense to me to say, well, the U.S., whatever the U.S. represents, the presidency, whatever, is probably not going to be, even though it was a turbulent time, and I'm not willing to say it would be impossible for fascism or communism to arise in these other countries, or I'm not willing to say that it wouldn't have been impossible for Hitler to, have fallen from grace, essentially, and a return to a capitalist or even a socialist state might have been possible. What I'm saying is it doesn't seem to make sense for the countries to kind of make that decision for themselves. Now, if you take these more as an abstraction, it may make more sense. It would not have been impossible for, say, France to actually start to align themselves more with Germany, to reach out towards them. Or, just in terms of a military and political realpolitik going on. Those, I think, would be more reasonable to believe of the governments. And that's actually what this seems to mean. I mean, it's not like if the U.S. moves, well, let's take a look at the Germans. If the Germans move out of dictatorship to paternal monarchist, they're not going to reinstate the monarchy, right? The titles, the locations in this, I don't buy this game as this tripartite or trilateral division of the ideologies. And that's kind of a shame, because that would have been a very interesting backdrop to it all, to allow the ideologies to play out. But you'd need kind of random events and stuff like that. I just don't feel comfortable with the idea of player actions just, I think we'll become capitalist, That seems a little weird, especially in the time frame of the game. Anyway, the Germans won the initiative with everybody bidding the one. And what they're going to do is they're going to go for a minor economic agreement. Now, this is going to cost them $4 to do. So we've got to find their $4. In addition to the one that they bid. And they're going to play this. So I've got two choices here. And from a military standpoint, two that I want, because I'm interested in getting factory. From a military standpoint, Turkey is the more attractive. But from an overall economic standpoint, Spain is more interesting because they have more resources. I'm not sure which to go into at this point. If I look at Republican Spain, they don't like Italy. And that means Italy can never have a treaty with them, I believe. or control them or something. Turkey doesn't like the USSR, Bulgaria, or Greece, so that's not going to be as big a deal. If I'm not going to increase my production multiple, trying to get these factories is important. I probably am going to end up getting both eventually anyway. Anyway, I'm gonna go into Spain because I think in the long run, Spain is more likely for me to move towards. Now, there are prerequisites to these suckers, and we have to kind of look in the rules and try to find this. But the prerequisites are, my initiative has to be less than the miner's will. Well, the miner's will is found over here on the war chart, and I'll look for, is it nationalist Spain? No, it's just Spain. So it has a stability of 3, a will of 3. My initiative's 1, so I can get away with this. And I'm going to demand a factory from them, which will increase my production. They only have 1, so we'll fill the box out there. This has other effects, though. I get +1 to the miner. This doesn't affect the US entry. And that'll be it. So I get a little political interest marker here. And I'm sorry, this should be Republican Spain. I don't know if I said nationalist. That sounds familiar. And now I also have to drop some kind of marker. Oh wow, I have more 1s than I thought. I need to drop some kind of marker on this act because no one else can take that action. And move this down to remind me. Let's see. Oh, I have other actions to take. I have to trigger someone. Let's trigger something that doesn't like us, like Hungary, just to clear this away. Because Hungary's over here and it's going to cost them 3 per to move out of there. That's not going to happen. And then I roll for turn end. And I know it's a 3 or 4 or 2 or something like that. Well, I know it's at least a 3. It might be a 4. But we actually get 2 actions. So now I'm going to have to think about what the Ruskies want to do. The Russians took as their option the purge option. Remove this because we got another magic 3 on the dice. One time it rolled okay. I really don't trust these dice. I mean, I don't understand it. It's just crazy. But it doesn't, nothing seems bad with them, you know? It's just what it counts. They fire off something horrible. The purge is kind of weird. The big reason for it is it gets my political effectiveness up 2 points, and that's huge. And that's what everybody's kind of aiming for right now. Let's get our political effectiveness up. The Germans are probably looking at trying to slow walk the game. In their case, if they do the production multiple, in 36 or 37 they cause 11 US entry. If they do it later, it gets less. So that's kind of been my aim here, but I don't know if it's possible without giving away other advantages that are too strong. So the Russian purge, though, reduced their army greatly, and that makes it kind of tempting for Germany to start gearing up and just try to blast their way into Russia. The problem with that, of course, is the Russians in this have a bonus to buying military units, the army strength points, and I think they get 4. So normally it's 1 per 1. They get 4 per 3. Now, It's kind of weird because WIF Deluxe, WIF Final Edition, whatever, changed the means by which the Russians kind of get their troops, but I think they improved the troops to the extent where the Russian army is better, so it's kind of on par with some of the other armies as you get later in the war, which means that it's not such a bad thing. You know, it's not like they're expected to be building a lot of crap the way they once were. I'm not sure. So the reduction that was in place previously was kind of taking that into account, that the Russian units were so crappy. So I don't know why they have an economic advantage in building infantry here, but anyway. So one thing we may want to consider is the possibility of some kind of war. Now I look at like Ethiopia, and I notice something really neat here. There's no border crossing there. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean. Likewise, there doesn't appear to be a border crossing, but who knows? This may be part of Egypt here. I hate this map, and this would be part of Libya. But there are no border crossings here either. That's disturbing. I don't know if that's meant to say that there's no terrain you can make the attack from, but the Italians certainly attacked Ethiopia. I think. What am I missing here? Well, I'm not absolutely certain of that now. I thought they did. But I am confusing it with Eritrea. But they simply don't have... there's no marker there for it. There are other places where there's no marker too, where you would think, so, you know, the crossing here, you could say, well, that's all desert. Yeah, but so's all this crap. What the hell? Why is Libya immune? I'm not sure. Nor is that immunity defined in the rules or anything that I know of. Of course, finding where it says, so for example here they don't talk about the map crossing points. It could be a typo. 20 if no arrow. Okay, well there you have it. Nice of them to I mean, yes, it's there, but I don't think, I think what they should have put 20-point arrows in where there was room for them, but then you would come up with the confusion with these. Anyway, what I was going to assume was it's probably like a 30 or something. I can get through that because the forces are big. But I don't see a point for going into Ethiopia, to tell you the truth. The only point is to bring these Italian units into play against Egypt or something. That just doesn't look very likely. Saudi Arabia might be more interesting if I can find it. At least has some oil, not a whole hell of a lot. So I mean, and the nice thing about Saudi Arabia is it has no troops, essentially. Unfortunately, I can't just attack across the Red Sea. I'd have to figure out some way to get to Saudi Arabia. And now here I can see Persia's in the way. No. I don't think there's a way without going through Egypt. So that would make sense. So yeah, it's I'm just not sure that there's much that I'd want to do with these troops. Trying to consolidate the forces. Well, I can attack these things. They have no defenses. So I should be able to take territory from the Brits with the armies that I have present. Doesn't seem to be any army down here. The Belgian Congo, if Belgium falls, would become a tasty little snack too, to someone at least. So I don't think we're going to see anything in terms of dealing with military affairs, and thus we're at production. And again, I don't think I really want to build troops up particularly. So I'll just be collecting my points. As I begin to try to figure out the bidding for this turn, I got a couple of people who put theirs down. Japan feels like it's very important for them to get their Tojo in place and to be able to gear up, whatever. I'm starting to look at gear up requirements, because at earlier points I was saying, well, it looks like they're, nobody can gear up yet. Well, then I find the Axis can, which is pretty clear. But here, I'm looking at the U.S., but the same as with Russia. This option increases blah, blah, blah. You can do it if you are fascist. The current year is greater than or equal to the year specified on the production multiple track. Well, we have years here for these guys. We're looking at the U.S. right now. So all democratic production multiple levels is above yours. Or any major power is 2 or more above. Well, I guess China is not above mine. And that's what the CH here means. But then we look some more. What was the third one? Or any other major power is 2 or more above. Well, Germany, pretty much every major power, is at half, which looks like it's 2 above me. So I think the U.S. can gear up automatically. Why are there limits on the 1/5? I don't know. Obviously, if the U.S. gets in action, they want to. Likewise, Russia's works out the same way. If the current year is greater than or equal to the year specified, fine. If the Commonwealth or Germany's or the USA's production multiple level is above yours, or Japan's is 2 or more above. Well, everybody except China and the US is above the Russians, which means they're going to be able to gear up anytime they want. Okay. And this is not what I was expecting. It looked like there's limits on these things that are actually meaningful. Let's see how many others. We know the fascist powers can do what they like. Let's see about China. Japan's production multiple is above yours. Well, again, obviously Japan's in the half box. They're going, China can always go up. Why is there a box with limitations? Why is there a year there? Damned if I know. Can't see the Germans. Italians are fascist, don't have to worry about them. How about the French? Maybe these can all gear up. Germany's production level is above yours, or the Commonwealth or Italian is 2 or more above. Well, okay. We've got somebody who can't go forward. Germany or Russians is 2 above, or any other is above yours, or any other power is 2 or more above. So again, it looks to me like everybody can gear up except for Britain and France, which is not at all what these things seem to mean. I can understand why Germany, for example, has limitations, even though they're fascist, because you might be playing the game with the wild card and they can become not fascist. What does not make sense to me is why there's any limitation on this box when it is quite obvious that there are going to be major powers in the 1/2 box. Must happen. I don't know. Some people put some big money on their runs, but they didn't get anywhere really. The Japanese, they may have. They were only bid +1, plus wherever they were, which wasn't very good. I think they put a 3 or a 4 in. But other countries like France and the US put $4, $3 down, and didn't get very high up just because of the intrinsic advantages that are accumulating through the political effectiveness of a failed bid the turn before. Now, that works great if, you're Germany or Russia, or even these guys down here. It's not so good if you're the US or China. You're not going to get a turn that way. You've got to spend the money for it. And 4, well, +1 gets them in the 5 range, which put them, not in a great place particularly. And then they get another plus off of wherever their location was for the last turn, which was probably towards the end as well. So we only had effects played by Italy, Britain, and Japan. Italy upped their production, and that started a number of things. Among others, They triggered a Portuguese movement in their direction. Austria and Hungary would be more positive towards them. You can see Japan's here. We'll get to that in a moment. Austria and Hungary would have been more positive towards them, but they felt like they were kind of wasting points because they could get right stacked on them with them, so they're going to leave them in the bank there. It'll move towards them at some point or another based on those. And they'll wait until they need them, basically. The disadvantage to that is somebody else can trigger them and move them into the Italian space and then use other points to move out. But we're hoping, you know, we'll get another action and trigger them before anything ugly starts to show up. Britain screwed the German factory over here in Spain. They can just, you know, negate that as long as they have an effective action and their initiative is lower than the German one and lower than the Spanish willpower. They were looking around for something to do, but they bought their action for one. So, you know, what the hell? Let's do it. It's one of the reasons they're up here. It's hard to knock somebody down. You have to make a big investment to jump your way up. They were considering freeing India, but overall that looks like a bad deal. It gets you troops, but loses you the factory and resources in India, and the troops kind of build up over time. If you're going to do it, you want to do it early in the game, but it just does not look like a wise move for the English. It does give them a richer Indian army if the Commonwealth goes to war with either Russia or Japan, which is, you know, is almost certain to happen, one of those, right? And the last one was Japan took the Tojo option, which jumped them up. Now, between the Italian and the Japanese actions, they brought U.S. intervention against those countries up. Italy 8, Japan 11 as totals. Now, the way these work, it's not like, hey, we just have to get to some number against a given country. It's this complicated formula. And it's actually important because the U.S. can acquire intervention levels against itself, which doesn't make much sense, except that if they're trying to go to war with the Axis or the communists, they end up improving or decreasing their chances based on whatever at war, whatever antagonism they have towards the various democracies. On the other hand, by boosting this up, and it was by boosting up their own war value, they make it easier to go to war with another democracy, which is kind of weird. I don't think that's very likely to come about in the game. I can't see. Basically, what would have to happen is the democracies would have to be declaring war on things that the U.S. cares about on their own. It really only serves as a depressant for the for the other values. Anyway, I've recorded the bonus bids, and now I guess we go to production because again, I don't see anybody doing anything on the map. You know, if anybody wants to reposition forces, they can, but I just don't have much reason to do so at this point. And we only got two people. Germany and Russia went. Getting a low roll, ended things early. Both geared up, and that had some fairly heavy effects. You can see we're getting a lot of diplomatic effects in places. It's kind of hard. You know, I just look for something that, gee, that makes sense. So like for the Germans, they said, oh look, we picked up a -1 in Sweden. Let's trigger Sweden now and wipe that out. Largely, the triggering seems to be not really to affect any moves, but to prevent bad things from happening when you see them coming. That's going to improve both countries' income quite a bit. In the case of the Germans, let's see, we have 7, 8. We don't have any additional factories, but we'll be producing 8 instead of the 4 that we were. For Russia, 12, 16, 17 divided by 5 means we're going up from like 2 to 4. So we're getting more money, which means we can bid more. Now, of course, you may not want to spend your money on bidding, and the Russians are actually in debt now. You may not want to spend your money on bidding because you got to build up your armies. You have these events and stuff you want to do. On the other hand, I made a foolish error with the Chinese. I chose to wait with the U.S. and try to boost the Chinese bid up. I spent like $3 on a Chinese bid. Well, that still only gave me a 4, which earned me last place because that's where I was, so I didn't get any action. I'm not getting a big bonus going into next turn. I'm still getting that stupid +1 because my political effectiveness sucks. And China just, you know, is kind of languishing here, hoping to get to where they can up their production. But if they can't do it, they're going to run into some problems. Didn't the Japanese up theirs? The Japanese did Tojo last time. They still haven't upped their production yet. But these production increases, you know, are affecting the U.S. entry thing. And this system, at the very least, is kind of painful in terms of the U.S. production, or U.S. entry. Because, first of all, I don't have a little place to keep it. I could write it down. I'll probably have to keep a running tab somewhere instead of what I'm trying to do here on this sheet. But right now, Germany has an entry of 15. Russia has an 8. Italy has 8. Japan has 11. Those are the only countries which have earned any points yet. Nowhere near the level in which we need, you know, to be able to enter a great war. But what I have to try to figure is the actual formula is something like, I don't know, the amount of points you have against the Axis nation you're trying to declare war on, plus half the amount of points of all the other Axis nations, minus half of the amounts you have allocated to democracies in the Soviet Union or something like that. So like the naval treaty, there's this annoying calculation that has to just keep being done. I guess it could be kept track of on paper, you know, to give you a fixed idea of how close you are, etc. But it's pretty damned obnoxious the way it stands. Anyway, I'll go to the production. Again, people aren't building armies because the cost to mobilize. The nice thing about the cost to mobilize is it gets the money out of your hands so you don't spend it on bids and options, right? The bad part about it is you spend money, you don't need to spend it until you're ready to go to war, basically. So building up your army doesn't make a lot of sense. The only reason is a psychological one, except for the naval treaty. France wants to get an activation because they've agreed with the Brits to not, you know, to not get into a war over who's going to have, you know, the least boats, which is this effectiveness decrease that the French are facing right now. But the English are constantly ending up ahead of them. The English could pick the naval treaty, and they might well do that to help France or whatever, but it doesn't really, because France still has to take the 0 pick, so they actually have to get an action to sign the treaty, whether they're the ones who pay for it or not. So, until they get that, they really can't do anything, except they could start building navies. And the way I'm doing this is, if somebody starts producing something, other people can produce in response, which means the English with a higher production will be able to build up their navies more rapidly. And the treaty's not in effect right now, so it doesn't really hurt them to do so. Okay, so we ran through actually to the end of 36 at this point. We've been doing one per turn in the videos for a little bit. Activation is, the US and France had a problem. They had an election they have to meet here. France has to do one a year. This is the one per 4 years, but it has to be on a specified month for the Americans. So we kind of had to get into the running. US spent like 7 on their bid. France, I think 4, and they got kind of lucky in terms of only Italy squeezing ahead and the die rolls allowing them to get a turn. Seems to me like, you know, the dice are very unlikely to give you too many turns. At least these dice are. But, you know, it does make sense that there would be a low roll among the first 3 rolls. Not necessarily a 3 or less, but it just seems to be happening that there are about 3 activations that you can count on, I think. And I've actually not seen it go beyond that on this one, but my gut feel for probability says around 3 should be around the average, so we should see more. If it's not, the system doesn't quite work, because it would be very hard for Britain, for example, to back Czechoslovakia or something in time. They have to be, you know, after Germany, but in the few that run. And if if there aren't at least 3, that's going to be pretty unlikely. I don't think anybody put a bid over 1 who didn't get an activation this time, which is kind of good. The Italians did a minor trade agreement over here with Turkey. The reason for that, they have 4 factories and only 3 resources, so that they could pump the extra resource in. Plus, it gets them some diplomatic movement on Turkey. Germany's thinking Anschluss at about this point. They would like to. I don't know if there's much reason. They might actually go for Czechoslovakia if they can get away with it. The real big thing there is, hey, where do the Brits and the French fall in this? Because the Germans have higher production right now. The problem is the Brits might actually step in and be able to stop it. And we could end up seeing a war erupting way too early for Germany. Czechoslovakia, I believe, has a pretty good army. It should. 62. That's better than the German army. The restricted German army. Alright, so that pushes us on, I guess, into 37, and I'm just going to keep going. I don't want to put a video up with just a half hour or so. That production multiple of 1 was good enough, but it's not. It needs to be above 1, which is really peacetime maximum of 2 for Germany. I'm not sure I want to go up to there in order to do an Anschluss or demand the Sudetenland or any territorial demands like that. One possibility might have been, really look at this. I've done what I did, but going to war with Belgium. Again, though, that has a PM greater than 1, which I probably don't want to do. But Belgium, grabbing Belgium early gives me an extra resource. It kind of degenerates the French border. It's probably not as big a deal in this game because I can get 30 armies across this way, but I can make a more massive invasion by having Belgium. Would probably destabilize the world in ugly ways early on that I don't know if I want to do. Just declaring war on something probably doesn't make a lot of people happy. Actually, like most things in this game, it's a mixed bag. Some people are afraid and willing to buckle to that fear. Some people not so thrilled. Britain ought to be looking at putting guarantees on things so they get a Casus Belli at least out of any declaration, because we're starting to get to the point where Germany's in some situation, in some potent situation. We actually had 4 activations this time. U.S. geared up, Britain geared up, Japan geared up, and the Germans made a trade agreement with the Spaniards. Got some movement over here. I don't know, there were a number of things moved. Siam is in the fascist camp now. There were a lot of points in favor of Japan there. They decided to trigger that. And, you know, now the countries that haven't done a gear up are really in kind of iffy position. Now, the U.S. put a huge bid in, as well as the cost for the gear up, so they're actually deep in the negatives. Everybody else is doing okay money-wise. And they'll make that up. It may mean that they can't really do much for a while. They have to kind of stockpile their money. But it's kind of neat when you're up at the top of the chart. It's somewhat desirable to keep bidding, keep actions coming, because you've got this big bonus coming towards you. And that kind of provides the level at which other people have to put their bids. Now, I wasn't being very careful with this. It's pretty damn obvious, but I wasn't being very careful with this with some of the countries. So when China put their bid in, they ended up, you know, about where everybody else was, and that was just dumb. But they're going to have a hard time making that up. They have to make sure that they have enough money left to do the gear up after their bid as well. So they may be throwing a big one in, trying to break the bank there. I've shifted to keeping U.S. entry onto here, and you can see everybody except France and China has managed to piss the U.S. off, including the U.S. itself. We'll do production. Again, not much reason to actually buy anything, but the problem is when I don't buy things, I look at the big money I have here and I think, ooh, I can do lots, you know. That may not be the wisest idea in the game, because Germany doesn't have, as an example, a very big army. Nor does Japan, in terms of being able to, say, face the Chinese army. They need to build up quite a bit before they're ready to go in. But they can do that all at once, pretty much. There are no gearing limits, like I said before. You can just slap your whole army down just about when you're ready to rock. And I don't feel ready to rock yet. Although, you know, it is... well, when did the Japanese go in? They went in 37, so... they ought to be thinking about it, or at least trying to think about what they need to do to get resources. China may not be the best move, though. The limited war in China doesn't look particularly pleasant. The full all-out war in China, well, if I'm going to do a full all-out war, maybe China's not the place I want to go. Maybe it's the Netherlands, which is kind of scary. But the Dutch... you know, just don't have a fleet the size of Japan's, and won't be able to do much about anything militarily. And nobody's guaranteeing them or anything. So we could grab a big pile of resources down here really cheaply with very little cost, as far as I can tell. We'll see. That might have some major effects on the war chart that China doesn't. But it looks really tasty to me as a way to start things. So I've been screwing up, not big surprise, this free trade versus protectionism. Everybody's protectionist except the US, which means everybody gets equal build points to their production multiple added. Now, of course, I think everything's rounded up, so everybody would have been getting more production points. I'm going to ignore that until this turn. We'll try to remember it. But it's a pain in the ass. I mean, this is, you know, you have what looks like a pretty simple system, but then you have rules hidden. This is hidden under a particular optional card that you can play. The presentation is not very good. There needs to be a player aid for you to calculate your income, for example, if there's going to be garbage like that in there. And then it goes further than that. You get build points equal to the sum of the free traders with which you have a treaty. Now, nobody has a treaty with the U.S., so that's fine. But that's extra money that, you know, again, that you could pick up. And I guess that would be added to your other build point multiplier. But with the U.S. under a half, it's not really a big deal at all. But we should be seeing extra money for, you know, most of the powers other than the guys who started with really low production multipliers, the less than a half production multipliers. Trying to figure out what to do with Japan, I looked up the weather table, another place where the rules are obnoxious. This is how I stumbled into this, as I'm following rules around throughout the book. First of all, weather, unlike in WIF, is just across the whole board, which makes less than no sense. But if you play it with whiff, it works properly. But playing without whiff, you know, a Japanese invasion down here in the Pacific, well, I have to wait until the summer months, which I believe is when the monsoons are hitting and is the worst time to be launching an attack. I want to be doing it in the winter or whatever. That's a bit of bullshit. But you'd think they would have bothered to get that right, because it affects the timing of everything, right? I mean, the Japanese Pearl Harbor would not have happened, all those invasions and everything, in the middle of summer. It just couldn't, and thus it affects the timing between the two major theaters. But I'm considering that invasion of the Netherlands, and this is the wrong month, because there's mud in winter, and those have effects. Now, finding those effects was tough, which is another issue. You look under the weather rule, and it just says it affects combat. You have to look under, and it doesn't give you a reference into where. So I looked under all the different combat rules, and way at the end of the combat series, there's a catch-all, hey, here's where all the modifiers are. But you know, it's just a tough, now that I know that, I'll probably remember it, but it's a tough rule book to approach. It's just such a mess. And now I'm not sure, you know, whether or not the Japanese really want to do something. There's nothing terribly exciting for them. And that's kind of the problem across the board with this game, is I keep coming up with, well, what do I want to do? I can't come up with something. You know, the US is low on money, so I don't want to put a big bid in. I don't have anything huge I want to do, but if I get the bid on a 1 because I'm way up here, that's cool. I've got things that I could do. And that's kind of the feeling I have. I don't want to waste money, but on the other hand, the guys who have a lot of money, who have the bigger production right now, they have an advantage, and I feel like I should be using it. And by kind of passing or just bidding 1, I almost feel like I'm shirking my responsibility to run my country right. But then when I come up with, oh yeah, I'll do a trade agreement with Spain, you know, what the hell? You know, it seems so minor in the context of the game. One thing I'm really worried about is this is DoD2, which was designed for 5th edition. DoD3 is what's designed for the final edition. And I'm not sure how that handles US entry, because final edition and it's, you know, the deluxe that I'm going to be using, use a very different US entry mechanism involving all kinds of secret shits and everything than the original World in Flames did. And I feel like I need to kind of rationalize between DoD2 and the actual whiff game. I probably made a big mistake by picking up DoD2. When I looked at reviews and discussions, it made it sound like, yeah, DoD2 is fine. It's just the same as DoD3, except it has less options. I thought, well, that's fine. Now that I'm looking, numbers for troops don't quite align properly. There's a discussion about that Roland puts forward when he's questioned, why doesn't Canada have any starting forces? I think it should in DoD2's alignment, given that like 6 combat strength points in this count as a full core, or in whiff. So I don't know. But yeah, we'll try to rationalize it as much as we can and see if we get something that works when we cross that bridge. Okay, so this turn, Russia and China both geared up. Big bid by China. They threw in like $6. They're at their maximum indebtedness. They'd have to go to the League of Nations to get that improved, and I think they counted it, but I'm not positive. And France signed the naval treaty, which they've been wanting to do. They could have gone for their election this time, because they got to do one every damn year, which is just a pain in the ass. They should change their government or something. But that gets their effectiveness up to the 2 that it's worth being. Nobody else was able to sign on because the turn ended after the 3. And now we go to production, and the French would like to get their production up. I think they're allowed to. If the Brits are up there, I'm sure the French can get up there. But as of right now, getting the effectiveness up is a more important thing. If you've got free options that just cost you a little bit of money instead of the 5 per pip on the die roll and a chance of getting your effectiveness up, they're definitely worth taking. And in this case, the naval treaty was an easy thing. Got us some movement on Venezuela, which wasn't really all that positive. Venezuela was already kicking around in the democracy section. One thing to note, these guys wrap around. So like B here connects to B here, and you got to kind of watch, you know, which way is actually getting closer, because it's on a sphere essentially of some sort, I guess. Doesn't really look like a sphere because A here, yeah, A is next to DD, yeah. Okay. I thought it was next to AA, and I'm like, that doesn't work. Okay, so yeah, it's on some kind of wraparound sphere. You know, I don't know, because if we wrap this around, it's not really. It's like some kind of it's something that does not work in 3 dimensions. Maybe it works in 4, I think. Because if we wrap this to there, right? Oh, we're just folding the wrong, no. Yeah, either way I fold this, I don't know. My spatial geometry is not very good, so, but it doesn't look right to me. It's over here. Oh, this is the Spanish Civil War marker. So yeah, we'll see how much money people produce. Other people were trying to sleaze by with a 1 bid, see if they got something. It's possible that someone like Britain or the US or whatever would have taken the naval treaty for other reasons. Germany would have been very interested in it, because now without that, they still have to pass 2 people to get their way up in the naval buildup. But it's, you know, it's a lot of points for the German Navy to get up there. You really have to kind of commit to the whole Z-plan idea if you're going to get your Navy up there. And you start doing that, and are you really engaging in the things you need to be doing to secure yourself for when the war actually breaks out? It feels kind of funny about this system, and it always has, is, you know, you're doing these gear ups trying to get points, and then you're not necessarily building military with them. So yes, your economy is geared up towards the military, but it's not being used for military purposes. It's being used for diplomatic purposes, for increasing your economy, maybe for signing treaties for these bids over here. And it's kind of hard to say that it makes sense that you're pissing people off with some of these actions. And those actions that you choose are doing it in and of themselves. So, like, you know, everybody's geared up, but nobody's building any armies. So it's not like they're really mobilizing, but they're preparing so that they could mobilize. So I guess you could argue it that way. It's just, it rings a little funny to me in a way that, I don't know. It just feels like it's not quite capturing the essence of what's going on, the political maneuvering that shouldn't be costing you, international goodwill or whatever, which really kind of amounts to the U.S. The U.S. is the only thing that seems to be swayed. There's a certain game balance factor in it, which is that, you know, whatever you're producing, whatever things you're doing are improving your position overall. And you could kind of say, well, it's assumed you're building up your military or something. But it just doesn't feel like you're doing things that necessarily are going to piss the U.S. off very much. For example, if Japan is not fighting a war anywhere, if all they're doing is diplomacy on people, I don't know how much the U.S. really feels threatened by that. Or if they do, how much they remain dedicated to capitalism if they do. They're starting to move towards something else if they're getting pissed off at you for, like, you know, cutting trade deals or something. Okay, so this is a little weird. But we're going to test out the system and see if it remains so weird. Japan has bought themselves the first bid, and they're going to declare war on the Dutch. There's a lot of resources in Netherlands, East Indies, which is what I really want. The problem with this, of course, is to defeat the Dutch, I have to also take the Netherlands, which is quite far away. We're going to see if the Japanese Navy and Army can actually get out there and do anything. And this could just be a terrible, terrible idea. I just want to see if the system validates the assumption that, wow, this is just going to cause humongous problems. Here's the thing, though. Declaring war on the Dutch doesn't put me at war with anyone else. It does put a lot of points in the Netherlands against Japan, which whoever is their controller, if they manage to activate them, can swing them into their space and then can declare them in the war, which essentially declares the major power in the war. But if this is handled quickly enough, it's going to be over. Now, I don't think it can be handled quickly enough. I think that the naval rules probably will prevent that. But I'm willing to take my chances here and see where the Dutch end up and what happens, who gets control of them, just to kind of test out the system and see, hey, you know, is there a flaw here, or does it react at all reasonably to this kind of act of aggression just taking off? Because, you know, if the Germans just roll into some place, well, they're probably picking some place near them, and they can just take it out, assuming they have a big army, which they don't right now, before anybody has any real chance to try to defend it. And same thing with the Soviets, if they just were to roll into a place. Now, neither of them, I know the Germans can't declare a war. The Japanese, though, have no restriction based on their production multiple. So, you know, they don't have to pump up to production 2 in order to start grabbing stuff. There might be an error, but it looks like other countries are also in that same position where they don't have to upgrade. France, of course, has to have a casus belli. Looks like Russia doesn't have a requirement, I don't think. But they have to have done the purge first, it looks like. I don't know, I can look it up in the specifics. But in Japan, very clearly, there's nothing listed here. And there's nothing listed under the war. Breaks all treaties with that country. I assume that's your own treaties, not other people's, because if it was, it would screw things up in terms of them being able to intervene due to the treaties. Yeah. The only person who has a problem with declaring war appears to be the Germans. They're the only ones who have a production requirement before they're allowed to start. So, anyway, what I'm hoping here is that doing this will involve one of the major Western powers in the war. But I want to see what, you know, the land combat system works, how it works, etc. And I don't know that I want to play out the entirety of World War II using this system. It might be fun. I'm not denying that DoD2. It seems to be, you know, this complete geopolitical game to cover the era. But I have these desires to get to doing it in conjunction with WITH. And I just want to prove to myself that this was a horrible idea, because otherwise it's really a cheap move by Japan to just grab the Netherlands without other people getting involved. Now, the problem, of course, then is, well, no. Major powers aren't the same, so like an attack on China, because it's a major power, wouldn't give it the same opportunity to involve a major power in the war that I think this is going to give, just because of the distance to the Netherlands. Anyway, most of the operation is going to be pretty standard. We're going to fire off, let's get the Japanese chart. We're going to fire off the war event, all the effects here, and all the effects here for declaring war on the Netherlands, which includes pissing the hell out of the Netherlands. Not surprising. There was something else I wanted to go into about this. And it'll also put the Netherlands' forces on the board under whoever their controller is. Who their controller is, I'll come back after the events kind of all fall out to show some of the call it cascading effects of doing this. But I just want to try out something crazy since I don't really feel like playing this whole thing out. And, you know, we'll see. Maybe it'll be so crazy it's interesting. I don't know. Not everything contained in the war rule on Japan seems to be present. So I have to kind of refer to the German war rule and try to see if there's anything in there. In particular, deciding the controller isn't covered in the Japanese rule. So nobody controls the miner already. Nobody's allied to it. Who's closest on the status display? Well, let's find the Netherlands. The Netherlands is in the 0 spot. It can't be my own faction, which means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like either, 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like China, England, and the Soviet Union are all tied. So which one has the higher initiative among the other two ideologies? Okay, so we're looking at China. It's way down. They're not going to get it. The Soviets are going to get the Netherlands. Okay, that's not exactly where the Western Allies would want it. They can't intervene if it's pro-Soviet, but the Russians could intervene against Japan, presumably. So that's going to create, you know, some of the element. Now, no one can, Japan does not get a chance to trigger any of the nations, so they notably can't burn up all of the Netherlands points. Italy could do it, though, to try to prevent the Netherlands from actually, you know, being in a position with the Soviets. So that may be what we're going to try to do. Because Italy goes next, assuming that Japan doesn't get an action. And now we're going to place Soviet units in the Netherlands, and they'll get to control them. They can't leave their home country, but I guess the navies can probably come out and fight. That's not very clearly defined either. And we can see that over here on the chart, it's really good to have your buddy able to drive the the political situation. I don't know. The Italians took a another factory over in Turkey. Now we have to pick up some more resources to run those factories. But basically, I'm trying to get my income up without having to drive myself up to the 2 multiplier at this point. One problem I have is the Russian countermix isn't very big on navies. I think as long as I don't overrun the total Russian countermix, I'm allowed to like use kind of substitute counters. So I've got some U.S. Ships there that are really Russian. We're expecting Russia to take some losses here. And I guess let's make the roll to see. And we're going to be able to get to the next turn, which is the Russians. But all the points have been cleared out of the Netherlands now. So there's not really a lot I can do. Even if I ally with them, it's too late. You know, the alliance had to be in place before for me to be able to get the casus belli from them for declaring the war. At least that's how I read things. You can't ally to somebody who's at war and just hope to declare war later. So I think the Japanese are going to get away with this only because of the fact that Netherlands was in a pure neutral spot where they weren't going to, you know, if they were pro-capitalists, one of the capitalist powers would have been very close to them and able to probably get them under control. It's going to be pretty hard for the Russians to declare the Netherlands into the war the way things are. So I got to figure out what the hell the Russians want to do. They probably want to prepare for a war with Japan and hope that they can manage it. Japan's response is to try to seize control of the Netherlands themselves, just because they can actually defend them and they don't think the Russians can. The Russians have already gone. They did a gear up that pumps them up here, and they're pissing the U.S. off pretty heavily. We're at 32 on them. Now, for the Brits to succeed, first of all, they attempt this, they pay the cost for it, but now they have to make a roll. And they have no economic agreements, they have no, the miners' willpower is an issue. This is the Netherlands, which has a willpower of 3. That's positive. I subtract my initiative. My initiative is 4, so I'm at -1 now. My distance puts me to -2 total. I assume the Netherlands is not hostile to me. They don't appear to be hostile to anyone. So we're looking at about -2. I have to roll anything but a 2 to get an alliance. And then I get a level of alliance with them. Well, I just get an alliance marker. It doesn't matter what it is. And although we don't get a great roll there, it's good enough. And what that means is that if I can get them under me, which I think will just happen, let's see. Apply treaty chart. There's no other effects. So I'll be making an alliance here with the Netherlands, and U.S. entry is going to increase. They're not going to be thrilled with the thing, but otherwise I'm going to get these bonuses, and notably there should be something good for me from the Netherlands itself. I get 3 points with them, which is enough that I can trigger them and move them into my space, so that next turn I can do the IPO 5, bringing them into the war, and thus bringing myself in. I'm not sure if control changes at this point. I think it does. When a miner has been declared war on, I'll have to look to see if there's something that changes the control of a miner. I think that it is the case that they will become pro-British at this point, simply because of that movement. But if that was the case, then they would have actually already shifted in our favor anyhow. So I don't know. I really don't know what to do. But we had to have them stacked in the space, no matter what, to be able to declare them into the war. So all this shifting might have put them in British control anyway, or US, I'm not sure. Looking over minor control, things just get really complicated here, and I don't understand. This is actually not control, it's something else, something similar to that. This is directed for the war as opposed to control. There's nothing that indicates that changes in the course of things, but when I look back to control, which I didn't think was the case, what I found, if I can find control, minor country control. Okay, so let's just make sure the U.S. could control the Netherlands, and actually they do right now. That doesn't give them anything except if you're in sort of the same ideology, someone controls you. So Belgium is controlled by France. Czechoslovakia is controlled by France. What does that mean? And I believe Venezuela is also controlled by France, but it may be by the U.S. because it's closer to the U.S. A minor country in an ideology is the closest major power allowed to control it, which also in that ideology. Okay, so I think the U.S. controls Venezuela if they're allowed to, which I'm sure they are. Now, if you're controlled 2 factions away, as Venezuela is, you just have its League of Nations voting. But if you control it in the same faction, as is the case with Belgium and Czechoslovakia, you get all their resources. Now, this wasn't clear to me, and I'm here getting all of Hungary's, Austria doesn't really count for shit, but I'm getting all of Hungary's resources, because that's a level 2 control here, and it's actually Japan and Italy who have them. Let's See, Italy's allowed to control Hungary. Obviously, Japan isn't going to be. But that means I should have been one faction away, getting any resources and factories which are not committed to another major power by economic agreement. Nobody's got any economic agreements in Hungary. So whatever Hungary's resources are actually going to Italy right now, which, given that I have another factory, means I'll actually be able to produce with them. But it also means that, you know, I've been ignoring Czechoslovakia and Belgium, which are producing for the Allies. Czechoslovakia matters because they have a factory buried somewhere under here. So they're actually an issue. And as to entering them into the war, I was incorrect, I think, and therefore made a bad decision perhaps with this alliance, because when I read this, the directing major power, a major power may join in a minor it is directing even if it is hostile to you, to me, providing all other prerequisites in IPO 5, and both the minor and you are at war with the major power that declared the war. I don't have a casus belli because I was not allied before the declaration, as far as I can tell. This feels goofy. I feel like I should be allowed to intervene if this war keeps going, which it will. It doesn't seem to remove the direction ability from Russia. The Soviets are going to be directing the Netherlands. IPO 5 only allows you to declare a minor in if you're already at war. Which to me just means that, well, the Netherlands is screwed because Japan's going to eventually be able to reach it, unless there's something about the naval supply rules, etc., that I'm not catching, that they're never going to be, that the Japanese are never going to be able to reach there. But they're going to be able to seize these territories from them, I guess, for whatever that matters. All right, well, that was the end of the actions. And I got to write down bid bonuses for everybody after Britain. They're going to get their points. And then we're going to move on to, I guess, checking the weather. Can do that right away. We're in May, June. Only on a 6 is there a problem. And we don't get that. So we'll get clear weather and we'll get to play, you know, the invasions and everything will go off. And there's a surprise attack as well. There's always a surprise attack in WIF and in this. And then we'll go to military affairs. It looks like we're going to be in perpetual war because the naval activity can only happen within 2 sea areas of territory you control. So unless the Japanese do something really wacky, like cutting an alliance with the Italians or something like that, they're not going to be able to reach Denmark. From the Italians they would, because, and it has to be like a level 3 alliance, they could get through here, the Red Sea here. I don't think Britain can close the Suez, which is not here, even though it looks like water coming up. And against someone that they're not objecting to heavily, we'll have to see. And then I could get to here, and now I'm within 1, 2 sea areas of the Netherlands. So that will be the only way I can get there. On the other hand, I don't think anybody can declare Netherlands into the war with them based on this situation. What we're going to do, the Netherlands gets to move first. Now they can put their navy out, I guess, although they may not be allowed to based on the rules of war here. May not move the miners, army, or naval points into any territory outside the miners' control until the miners join the war. They can move into sea areas. Okay. So yeah, I can put this out here and hope for the best. And the Japanese are going to need 10 times the land units here and here to transport for an invasion from what I can tell. Under land movement, they can move sea areas to form a beachhead. This is not... You can invade, provided you don't exceed your naval capacity and the seas being moved through. It's over here, I think. I don't know. I had it, and it seemed to be 10 times as much through all the transporting situations. So if I want to move these 14, I'd have to have 140 in each. I don't have that, but I could put 70 in each, and that'll allow me to move 7 of them for invasions. Only Java is really dangerous right now. The rest of them I can pretty much take according to my desires and just grab them. So we'll come back in a little bit once I'm a little bit more comfortable, but I think the Netherlands is indeed going to move their navy out here because I don't know what happens to it if I can't imagine anything good coming from leaving it in port. So now after naval movement, we've got 78 here, and the Dutch have 8, which means we're not going to reach the 10-to-1 bonus. 10-to-1 is a big bonus. Now both sides commit their forces. If the winner committed 10 times as much, then the winner loses nothing and the loser loses half their commitment. If the winner committed more than 125% of the loser, then I'm going to lose 25%. Well, I may want to actually send 80 in here instead of 70. That means I don't get to carry as many troops. But since I'm aware of what my enemy has put into play, and it's not that big a deal, I can get that 10-to-1 odds. Now, that means the Dutch probably don't want to commit too many of their forces, actually. So they'll only commit the 1 minimum, which means they just lose that, and the rest goes back to port, which is the same as if we hadn't gone out, except now the Japanese can only send 6 of their forces, and we'll break up their army and send it in and try to figure out what the land invasion itself is going to look like. Now let's look at these results. The Dutch have only 2 strength points. I've got 6 coming in. We both secretly decide how many we're allocating. The naval combat was the same way. In this case, I don't see a reason for the Dutch not to allocate both their strength points. There doesn't seem to be any real bonus to the invasion, to defending on an invasion. The defender always can send up to 20. But it looks like otherwise it's just a normal fight, which means we compare, and we've got different values here. If the winner gets 10 times as many points as the loser, he loses nothing. Well, we don't have that. Instead, we're going to be committing more than 125%. That means all we have to commit is 3 strength points. And everywhere else, I don't think there are notional units in this. I don't see any comment about them or anything like that, which means if I commit only 3 of my strength points to attacking the 2 here, I get that 125%, which means I lose 25% of what I committed, and the loser loses half. So 25% of 3 means I lose 1. We'll take that as a loss, and the Dutch take a loss. But now we also have the offensive points. I committed 3, the loser committed 1. I'm going to get 3 offensive points here, which means I actually overrun what's here. There's only a 1-pointer in Java. I don't know what that means for those extra troops or for the Navy yet. I'll have to look at that to see what that makes in terms of sense, but I also have to split my forces. Normally I would capture as many points as I've got there. Oh wait, no, there's 2 here. So I capture both of these. That's a 2-value city / whatever. The city doesn't have any value there actually. So I just get the 2 oil fields. I guess I get the city for free with them. But I don't know what happens to the units when there's nothing in the land area for them, when they've taken all their offensive points. On top of that, we've got this surprise and other modifiers hidden away, which says that my units were actually doubled. So if there's only 2 of him, I can't get up to 20 anyway, but I probably didn't need to send as many as I did. But I am sending the 3 because I want to capture other areas. I want to send a unit into Sumatra, a unit here into Borneo. These conquer the entire area. And that looks like all that I really need. So I send another unit into Celebes, or Celebes, or whatever it's called, to capture that as well. I still have to worry about Dutch New Guinea. But again, you know, these are just, I'm able to just kind of place things in those without any problem. So those are all going to fall, and I'll break my units up. I still don't know what happens when you conquer the territory, though. The land units that were left there were unable to retreat. By the way, this counted as a 1, and if it has no number in it, it counts as a 1 apparently. So I captured this with the first offensive, and one of these with the first offensive point, and a second one with the second offensive point. This thing, I'm using German units here because there aren't enough Japanese tanks of small quantity. I've got them, you know, spread out so that they're not really there, but it's okay as long as you have the right number, you know, as long as you're within your limits total. You don't have to have things divided up properly from what I can tell. The Navy was able to withdraw, and they went to the one place I didn't capture over here. And that is pretty much it. Nobody else wants to do anything because there's nothing they can really do to affect this. The British action to bring the Netherlands in was a failure. It's not going to mean anything. I can move them under me. I forgot to trigger them. That was my intention, and I don't want to go back and try to figure out what the hell I'm doing. But it doesn't mean a damn thing because I can't bring them into the war. On the other hand, the Japanese can't really bring the Netherlands against them. And with where things are, we're going to be getting the production value of the Dutch, even though the Russians control the Dutch, or something like that. That's the best I can figure out of this. I'm really beginning to wonder if this is going to be at all workable with WIF. I mean, it's not that it's going to be any worse than it is. It's just, geez, this isn't really making a lot of sense. What is possible to do in this game? You know, invading the Dutch and nobody really gives a shit, and taking all their oil. Wow. Most World War II games that I'm used to, if the Japanese want to take some kind of offense, and I think this includes WIF, if the Japanese want to take some kind of offensive against the Dutch, it pretty much forces the US and everybody else into the game. And this, it's not really any worse than fighting in China. And, you know, I mean, yes, there's more value to taking China. There's no question. There is absolutely no question with that. There's a lot of wealth in China. But grabbing this stuff allows me to gear up to the level 2 in terms of being able to get the, you know, the kind of resources that I need to make that production work, which is going to make the invasion of China easier, I guess. We'll see. That's at least my theory here, is that taking these. Now, do these have to remain occupied? I don't think so. I don't really see anything that seems to say that after I take a territory that I have to occupy it or anything. However, You know, having some defensive value there might be of some use. I'm not sure how much if nobody's at war with me, so I'll probably end up scooping those troops up, taking New Guinea next turn, and then trying to gear up for war with either China or Russia. Yeah, China looks tastier. Okay, let's send this one up. It's been long enough. I kind of lied there. I have to do production, and the Germans decided to boost their navy up to try to get rid of their penalty there. So they bought a whole ton of boats. They're up to 40 now, which gets them up to 200. Well, then France and England and the US all have to go up to 201 in terms of points or whatever. And now we're kind of in this open bidding for the navies. Germany has more money and gets a better force multiplier because they get 5 times per. So I think France is going to have to fall by the wayside in terms of naval power, because otherwise the Germans are just going to keep cranking. After this, the Germans say, well, we're going to buy another one that gives us 5 more points. Do you guys want to pan that out? I actually think the French may be ahead of the Brits right now, though, and that's kind of the problem, is that France, it might be best to leave the U.S. back at 0 effectiveness instead of some of the other powers. So we may try to arrange so that that happens, because we really can't afford to have France and England fall into being completely incapable of responding to German actions. Somebody's got to fail the naval situation. France has to be, or can afford to be, second worst, but they can't afford to be worst. And the Germans are just saying, well, we're not going to be first or second worst. We're going, because we're not in the naval treaty, so, you know, we're going to be third worst. And I think if the US and France both fall below, we'll be okay. Final consideration was Germany, or Russia, Japan, and China, none of which really want to buy. Japan could spark things off with a purchasing, but they're like, yeah, we want to get our multiple up, make some more money before we decide for sure how much we're going to commit. We've got enough money, we could have bought, you know, 10 troops or something without a problem. Germany, same thing. Germany may want to. We're considering the move on Czechoslovakia at this point, but we have to get our production multiple up, so we might as well wait until we've done that before we build more troops and stuff like that. So now we go up. I should move these back into place, otherwise they'll confuse me.